Professor Lungile Ntsalaze, the Executive Dean, College of Business and Economics, Professor Geoff Goldman, the inductee, there you go, Professor Remigers Gorlik, how's my Polish? Working on it. Respondent from Krakow University of Economics in Poland, senior leaders of the university, members of Senate and other academics, and then of course distinguished guests, any students that are here, all of you that have joined us online, Sanibonani, goeienaand, good evening to Bella. It is indeed a great honor and a special privilege for me to welcome you to the Professorial Inauguration lecture of Professor Geoff Goldman. As I do so, I wish to express a warm welcome to his beloved ones. I see there's quite a few here this evening, special guests and colleagues. This is indeed a proud and a joyful event for all of us, but it is a landmark moment for you, Professor Goldman, for us here at the University of Johannesburg, for higher education in South Africa and beyond. The inauguration of professors is a public ceremony, hence we are live streaming this event this evening, in which newly appointed professors are inducted into the office by the Vice-Chancellor or Vice-Chancellor functionary to deliver their inaugural address. The ceremony has its roots in medieval universities, and the ceremony serves several purposes. First, it is an expression of welcome and an entry for new professors joining the circle of colleagues who are already professors, and there are several of those colleagues here in the audience this evening. Secondly, it provides a platform for professors to display their expertise in a specific discipline and to showcase their research. In the colonial tradition subscribed to by many universities, assuming the role of professor refers to the gown and the cap. Once we've listened to the inaugural address here this evening, the gown, which is really quite nice, we're very proud of the UJ gown, I love this, denoting the professorship will formally be placed on your shoulders. Today we gather to witness Professor Goldman's entry into the illustrious community of scholars at our university. It celebrates his contributions to the discipline and ultimately his impact on society. Professors provide a university with its identity, with its character, with its academic legitimacy, but I think of all of these probably most importantly with its integrity. The inaugural lecture is a rite of passage, following the confirmation of the appointment of a person as a professor. This evening we will listen to Professor Geoff Goldman as the gown goes to town. And by this I mean that the power of the inaugural address is when the expertise is showcased beyond the corridors of the university and that it reverberates out into society. It stands out as a moment of pride for the incumbent, the family, the fellow scholars, the university, and ultimately as a proud moment for society. In the past, several philosophers and scholars have defined universities using some very narrow conceptualizations. For example, the search for truth, the search for universal knowledge, and even as instruments to serve the purpose of the economy, or being utilitarian in nature. Through our work and through our research at UJ, I hope that we can break out of some of these narrow conceptualizations and reflect on the university as contributing to the public good, working towards societal impact, which is also now what the University of Johannesburg is actively doing. what is the role then of the intellectual? Edward said in one of his articles, defined the role of the individual as one who commands a vast knowledge of a specific discipline. That's you. One who is rigorous in the analysis of literature. That jacket fits you too. One who views being an intellectual as a vocation, and who functions as a kind of public memory to recall what is forgotten or ignored, to make the connections that are otherwise hidden, and to provide alternatives for mistaken policies. It remains then for us, as a university with a Pan-African vision, to derive our mandate as intellectuals and as professors. And importantly, how do we embrace the role of a professor as a disruptor while continuing to be a flagship carrier for our discipline and for our university? This evening we will listen to Professor Geoff Goldman as one further step, only one further step in the journey of being a professor. This is a journey which does not conclude once this lecture has been given. In fact, I'm sure this is a journey that you've been on your whole life and will continue to be on as you move into the future. Notwithstanding all of this life journey, this inaugural lecture does create an opportunity for self-reflective pause for you and for all of us in your journey of being a professor. On that note, let me invite the Executive Dean, Professor Ntalazi, to introduce Professor Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Registrar, Professor van Vuren, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A special greetings to Professor Goldman, his family, friends, colleagues, and his students. I would also like to extend a word of welcome to those that are joining us online. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Geoff Goldman. Professor Goldman is a professor of critical management studies in the Department of Business Management at the University of Johannesburg, where he is also head of postgraduate studies. He holds a doctorate in leadership in performance and change from the University of Johannesburg and lectures research methodology and critical management theory on postgraduate level. He has successfully supervised more than 20 masters and 5 PhD graduates. As a qualitative and conceptual scholar, he has authored and edited more than 120 scholarly articles, conference papers, book chapters, books, and conference proceedings. His research interests lie within the area of critical management studies, business ethics, and strategy implementation. He is the managing editor of the Scopus Index, Management Journal, Acta Commerci, and is involved in the editorial panels of journals both in South Africa and in Europe. Outside academia, this is interesting. Prof Goldman has many hobbies. Apart from being a keen-sighted collector, he's also an avid motorcyclist. Furthermore, he is an expert scale modeler specializing in World War II aircraft. He is also an expert philatelist with one of the most extensive Union of South Africa and 20th century RSA collections in the world. Yet, there's nothing he enjoys more than spending time with those he loves the most, and that would mean cooking a fine meal, which I would be very interested to taste. And this is done for his partner, Thea, and their menagerie of kids, Christine, Stephen, Sonika, and Andrea. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Professor Geoff Goldman.
Good evening, everyone. UJ dignitaries, colleagues, friends, and family. And before I start on the address, I'd just like to say, where's my brother, Billy? It's their 43rd wedding anniversary tonight. So thank you for taking time out to be here tonight. I really appreciate it. Right. I must say I feel quite humbled on this auspicious occasion, which is ultimately the culmination of my academic journey. It's been a very rewarding journey, and a journey that has taken me to fascinating places and extraordinary people. I'd like to provide some context as to who and what I am by delving into my family background. Hopefully this will also shed some light on what makes me tick. My father is from Polish, Lithuanian, Jewish descent. His great-grandfather came to Durban via Australia after leaving Eastern Europe in the 1860s. When gold was discovered in Johannesburg, he raised some money and with some business associates started a gold mine in Roodepoort. The mine was Durban Roodepoort Deep. Now you know how it got its name. And because he was the main shareholder in the main street in the town of Florida on the West Rand was named Goldman Street. Unfortunately, his vice was gambling. That's why I work at the University of Johannesburg today. By the time my father was born, all stakes in the mine had been lost, and the family was very much working class. My father was a very talented footballer and had aspirations of turning football into a career. But he suffered a debilitating injury which put an end to his football career. He was compelled to follow a career in sales instead. My mother's family hails from France on my maternal grandmother's side and Holland on my maternal grandfather's side, and came to South Africa during the 18th century. I don't know much about my maternal grandmother's side of the family, except that she was a direct descendant of the second president of the Orange Free State, J.N. Boshoff. On my maternal grandfather's side of the family, there were apparently two de Vries brothers who originally settled in the Cape Colony. So subsequently, all de Vrieses are related, which means Casper de Vries is a relative. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. My grandfather was a gold miner, and in his later years he was a farmer. And after being a housewife and having 4 children from 2 failed marriages, my mother embarked on a career. By this time, she was in her 40s. She was a buyer at the AA, but resigned when she married for a 3rd time. Together with my stepfather, we moved to Mpumalanga, and they bought a nursery. After her 3rd divorce, she ran the nursery on her own. So why the history lesson? I suppose I've always realized from my mom and my dad that life provides both good and bad. And when there's good, one needs to be thankful for that and appreciate it unequivocally. But when there's bad, one needs to put your head down and just soldier on through. Focus on getting through those times to the best of your ability and not letting the bad get the better of you. I learned that life is cyclical, and that true character is not exhibited by how one enjoys the good, but how one rises above the bad. And through it all, I somehow knew from an early age that my parents wanted something better for me. They wanted me to have a better life than they had. And they felt the key to that was a university education. It was a given that I would go to university after school. It was just what I would study, a matter of what I would study. But when I went to university in 1989, I suppose neither of them bargained on me being there 34 years later. Although my mom and dad are no longer with us anymore, I think they would approve. So coming from a middle-class background and being raised by a single mother in the 70s and 80s, I spent my childhood playing outside with my friends. We played in the streets and went everywhere on our bicycles, and when we got a bit older, on our 50cc motorbikes. The main rule was that you needed to be home by dark. And when we didn't play outside, I found companionship in music and television. And if music was on television, even better. I'm a product of Generation X, the MTV generation. Right. Music had a profound impact on how my generation saw the world. Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun became an almost universal anthem for teenage girls. Well, it still is today. And everyone partied to Lionel Richie's Dancing on the Ceiling, Bryan Adams' Summer of '69, and Wang Chung's Everybody Have Fun Tonight. But music was, and is, much deeper than that. Our reality made sense in music, testing the limits of what was possible and probable came with music. We learned to rebel in our own way when Roger Waters and the rest of Pink Floyd taught us that we don't need no education. We don't need no thought control, no dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. And when Big D. Snyder from Twisted Sister shouted, "We're not going to take it. No, we ain't going to take it. We're not going to take it anymore." We also knew full well what Frankie Goes to Hollywood was trying to tell us in Two Tribes, and what Nena's 99 Luftballons was all about. If music gave my generation a lens to view the world, then science fiction opened up the floodgates of our imagination. This was the era of Star Wars, E.T., Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, The Terminator, Alien, Star Trek, The Fly, and arguably the gold standard of the genre, Blade Runner. Here, we explored questions surrounding time travel, teleportation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, multiple dimensions, alien life, sentience, and what it means to be human. Sci-fi and music defined our world. It gave shape to it, and breathed life into it. And it would determine how we as Generation X shaped and defined the world around us. Against this backdrop, I came into the world of academia 29 years ago. I didn't plan to be an academic. In fact, I wanted to pursue a career in advertising. I became an academic purely by accident, literally, but that's a story for another occasion. Yet somewhere along the line, this academia thing changed from being a job into becoming a career. And it's been a richly rewarding one too, I must add. Starting off at the then Technikon Witwatersrand, your life was dictated by the timetable. 24 lectures per week. You weren't as much an academic as you were a glorified teacher. However, as the landscape of higher education started to change in our country, so too did the expectations of Technikon teaching staff. Pressure started to mount for research outputs. I ventured blindly down this path. After having had papers shot down left and right, and being proverbially bashed all over the place by reviewers, my first breakthrough came in 1999 with having a paper accepted at a local conference. I still remember my feeling of elation when I got the news. I was going to speak at a conference. From there on, this research thing grew on me. And I was getting better at it too. This is where I evolved from being a glorified teacher into a burgeoning academic. Here, I realized that being an academic involved more than merely teaching a syllabus from a textbook. It involves the creation of knowledge, the incorporation of that knowledge into our current discourses, debates and syllabi, and the dissemination of knowledge that is shaped by our knowledge creation efforts. Therefore, there cannot be a separation between creation of knowledge and dissemination of knowledge in the classroom. But for all I was growing as a researcher, unbeknownst to me, I was actually just another business management lecturer publishing work on topics that were very pedestrian and not worthy of much inquiry in the first place. The sad thing is that none of my peers told me this, because their work was just as pedestrian and not worth of much inquiry in the first place either. Yet, back then, I didn't notice it. As far as I was concerned, everything was hunky-dory. Yet, the more I researched and conversed with certain colleagues, the more I started realizing that certain anomalies existed within the discipline of business management. It struck me as odd that the majority of business management research was conducted from the organizational point of view, or from the perspective of management. How would this lead us to insights beyond affirming the organizational perspective or the managerial plan of action as the legitimate course of action? This is tantamount to asking members of Stalin's Supreme Soviet whether the Soviet government was doing a good job. The only answer one could expect would be yes. What also struck me as odd was the obsession to quantify everything. Perhaps it's because I never did well in maths at school. But I've never been a huge fan of explaining the world according to statistics. Therefore, I ascribe to a qualitative way of thinking and researching. As my formal education included a healthy doses of dabbling in the humanities, I was exposed to a different path of learning about research than the average commerce or management graduate was. I found out when I started frequenting the conference circuit, it was as though those who came through the ranks of exclusive commerce education had very little understanding of things qualitative. I found myself in a sea of statistical significance, which made absolutely no sense to me. I kept on asking the question, so what? What do all these stats and statistical significances mean in the bigger scheme of things? I was also baffled by the concept of a South African perspective to management. From time to time, I would see South African management textbooks passed off as a South African perspective, which puzzled me, as these books were nothing more than mainly American notions with local examples. I had a problem calling this South African. At the time, I was also reading Ronnie Lessem and Barbara Nussbaum's Sawubona Africa, Embracing Four Worlds in South African Management, as well as Lovemore Mbigi's Ubuntu, the South African Dream in Management. I suppose Lessem, Nussbaum, and Mbigi's collectively problematized the whole idea of the South African perspective for me, to one where we need to look beyond South African examples, to South African stories, wisdom, and knowledge. In essence, also, I started looking for the essence of management. What makes management, as a scholarly endeavor, tick? And yet, I was baffled that no one else shared these thoughts. It was as though most of my peers seemed oblivious to these questions. Well, all but one. There's somebody sitting in this audience that I found as an intellectual partner, and that's Dr. Whitey van der Linde. There you are. Who shared my views on most of these, on these issues, and I must say, challenged me on a few more. My research led me around 2006 to a group of mainly European scholars calling themselves Philosophy of Management. Here I found a group of scholars who asked some of the same questions I had been asking, especially around quantification, doing research from an organization-centric perspective, and a quest to find the essence of what management is all about. I felt content that I had found philosophy of management. I felt affirmed, and it gave my thoughts legitimacy. I could rest assured in the notion that I was not starting to lose the plot, that there were others like Whitey and myself. In philosophy of management, I found a group of open-minded scholars who welcomed different points of view, who looked beyond management theory to inform management thinking, and who placed a lot of emphasis on philosophy as a field of study to inform and improve thinking about management. The more I reflect upon them, the more I think they should actually be called philosophy in management. But beyond all, they questioned. They left no stone unturned, and there were no holy grails. If you could not substantiate your argument, it would be questioned, and numbers were not very welcome. Both myself and Whitey became quite involved with philosophy of management, attending their conferences, presenting papers there, and I was also involved with their journal of the same name, and I also served on their editorial panel for a couple of years. Yet, even though we were involved with philosophy of management, I still felt there was something more. There could be more in philosophy of management. I don't quite know which day of the week it was, where I was. Can't recall what I was wearing, what the weather was like. All I know is that it was around the middle of 2012 when I heard about critical management studies, or CMS, for the first time. And if I'm correct, it was a philosophy of management contact who forwarded me an article on CMS. And I was instantly hooked. The more I delved into CMS, the more I realized that this is what I'd been looking for. And the movement was big, much bigger than philosophy of management. It had its own chapter under the Academy of Management, and journals such as Organization, Management, Human Relations, and Scandinavian Journal of Management were exclusively CMS-oriented. There was an international CMS conference every 2 years, and certain business schools and management departments were CMS-oriented. Now, CMS provides a counter-argument, in a sense, to mainstream management thinking. It challenges the pervasiveness of capitalist ideology in the scholarly endeavor of management, and is cynical of positivist methods of knowledge production. CMS sees organizations as vehicles of capitalist ideology, used to perpetuate the notion of capitalism. It sees organizations as inherently exploitative and oppressive to workers, possessing an uneven balance of power. Proponents of CMS are highly skeptical of mainstream management literature, seeing it as another mechanism to perpetuate the capitalist doctrine. CMS consequently strives for alternative conceptions of reality in management studies, which implies looking at different knowledge areas as well as methods of knowledge production. I started finding answers to questions I had the more I delved into CMS. By its very nature, CMS offers perspectives which speaks to the very essence of management by delving deeper than the act or actions of management, but rather addressing the motivations for managing in the first place. It sensitized me to a broader perspective where management functions as a mechanism to enact ideology within a political economy. Through CMS, I realized that one has to see management as a mechanism that enforces and perpetuates Western capitalism, not only as a form of political economy, but also as an ideology. During the first industrial revolution, factory owners realized that their operations were becoming too large for them to manage by themselves. These early industrialists of the late 18th and early 19th centuries had to employ people to ensure that these factories were run optimally and effectively. Stated differently, they employed managers to make sure the workers were doing what they were supposed to do. The management corps, thus, was created to ensure that the capitalist device operated efficiently. CMS realizes that Western capitalism has become so pervasive and dominant as both a political economy and ideology that it is susceptible to power imbalances which have resulted in arrangements of domination and subordination, as opposed to equality and interdependence. In these arrangements, capitalism, through structural power, endeavors to dominate labor and the market as far as possible, while democratic government enforces policy and regulation to protect labor and the market as far as possible. Yet, in the process, civil society loses some of the liberties democracy strives to uphold. The net result is that democratic society is not as egalitarian as we sometimes consider it to be. The structural power of capitalism has allowed it to put mechanisms and governance structures in place to perpetuate itself as an ideology. In so doing, it creates a contrived sense that the social system they are part of is rational and inevitable. This bears a striking resemblance to the notion of the slaves in Plato's cave, being shown images by the protectors of the cave, which do not necessarily reflect the exact nature of reality, but rather reflects a reality that fits the protector's personal agenda. In order to perpetuate itself, to spread further, and to become even more entrenched as a pervasive economic system, capitalism would like to be viewed in a certain way. Obviously, it would like to be seen as a system, or as a good system, one that has more answers to our economic challenges than other economic systems seem to have. Through the structural power capitalism possesses in Western democracies, training and educational policies can be influenced, and management curricula are no exception. In the Western world, it would appear as though management curricula have converged to a point where they all convey the same rudimentary message, established upon American and European principles. In South Africa, the situation is no different, with management curricula profoundly capitalist in their ideology. CMS also sensitized me to the notion that capitalism has a strong connection with a positivist tradition, and therefore management scholarship in the Western world is dominated by positivist tradition and method. South Africa, again, is no exception, and any form of scholarship outside of the capitalist-orientated mainstream is very rare. On the surface, this might not seem problematic at all. But let's probe a bit further. A glaring issue has to do with locality. As African, and more specifically South African scholars of management, we should be concerned with trying to find South African solutions to South African management challenges. However, it would seem as though our Western capitalist-orientated schooling in business and management has left little room for that. It's as if we tend to be located in Africa, but we seem not to be of Africa, referring to our thinking about our discipline, which still remains markedly Western and almost removed from the African context. CMS is also mistrusting of the mainstream strategies of knowledge creation. As mentioned earlier, Western capitalism is associated with positivism, and it's evident that the dominant knowledge production paradigm in management studies is positivistic. As CMS is born out of the critical theory tradition of dialectic argumentation and reasoning, it recognizes the existence of multiple ways of coming to know, and dispels the notion of a singular reality. In contrast, positivism venerates the scientific method and therefore recognizes this as the only plausible and possible truth, thus discounting all other ways of coming to know as invalid, resulting in so-called methodological prejudice. As a result, positivists do not participate in reasoned meta-theoretical discussions, as these are seen as useless exercises because meta-theory is taken for granted. This disregard for meta-theoretical debate and dialectic argumentation in general led Marcuse to reflect that positivism kills off reason. CMS also exhibits an astute awareness of the inconsistencies and contradictions that permeate mainstream thinking. Case in point is the current debate around degrowth. This debate attacks the capitalist assumption of unbounded growth fueled by limitless consumption, a result of our culture of consumerism. Degrowth proponents argue that the assumption of unbounded growth needs to be re-looked at and replaced with a more realistic dictum, as environmental realisms and resource constraints present a picture of reality where current trajectories of growth cannot be sustained. Yet, it's as if the notion of growth is so central to the capitalist conviction that any other picture is inconceivable. Lastly, CMS recognizes the political, social, and historic context of management. Positivists, in contrast, insist on values such as impartiality, neutrality, and autonomy in scholarship, and do not recognize the political, social, and historic realities that management functions within. On the other hand, CMS recognizes the value-laden reality that management operates in, and that context is of greater importance than the mainstream thinking acknowledges. It is striking to realize how little scholarship in management is devoted to management history, or how little scholarly work exists on how Dutch colonial rule, British colonial rule, and the apartheid regime affected business and management practices in South Africa. In summary, CMS recognizes the fallibility of the capitalist doctrine, distrusts positivist inquiry that pervades management research, and exhibits an overall awareness of the paradoxes that are born out of the mainstream ideology and encountered in mainstream management thinking. My journey into CMS opened a whole new world of possibilities. These are things that made sense to me, things I could argue and reason. CMS shed light on the anomalies I encountered as an emerging academic. However, CMS also made me realize things about the nature of business management as a scholarly endeavor in South Africa. In 2015, I wanted to know more about the extent to which CMS is known and pursued in South Africa. I conducted a simple qualitative survey amongst 88 senior management faculty, senior lecturers and the professoriate affiliated to 16 South African universities. I found that 56% of those surveyed never heard the term CMS before, and only 8% had published in the CMS space. These findings were as alarming as they were exciting. Alarming in the sense that it showed up yet again just how pervasive positivist dominance was in mainstream management thinking. That a strong peripheral discourse, such as CMS, which was known and established in Asia, South America, Australia, and Scandinavia, was for all intents and purposes unknown here. Exciting, in that there were actually some people who did know something about it, like-minded individuals I could hook up with, and some of them I actually knew already, such as Chris Callahan from WITS and Sean Ruganon from UKZN. Exciting also in that there was scope to create something. Perhaps the time was ripe to grow CMS in South Africa. So that's what I set out to do. I also felt it was sorely needed to be expanded in South Africa, for a critical tradition was not established and nurtured beyond current levels. South Africa would become complacent. There would be nothing to counterbalance the mainstream, nothing to constantly question and keep a modicum of Socratic inquiry alive. In CMS, I felt my academic endeavors had purpose. I felt there was something I was working towards. As Mark Twain said, the two most important days in a man's life is the day he is born and the day he finds out why. Now, I felt I also knew why. And from there on out, I have made it my ambition to grow CMS as a scholarly endeavor in South Africa. I don't want to profess that I have achieved it, nor do I want to profess that that what has been achieved has been my doing. But I'd like to think that in the 8 years since I conducted my rudimentary survey on the state of CMS in South Africa, a greater awareness for and of CMS has been created, and that CMS scholarship is indeed on the rise, albeit slowly. Yet I believe a solid foundation is being laid for critical scholarship in management, which can only be improved upon in future. In my quest to grow critical scholarship in management through CMS, I've been instrumental in leveraging for the successful implementation of critical scholarship-orientated module offerings on honours level and master's level. Plans are also afoot to introduce more critical scholarship-focused modules into the envisaged flexible BCom qualification that will be launched by the CBE in the not-too-distant future. At UJ, I endeavour to host a biennial CMS colloquium. 2024 will be the third one. I've edited 2 peer-reviewed books on CMS in South Africa since 2016 in an effort to establish a South African body of knowledge in the discourse. I plan to do so every 5 years. The third book is envisaged for 2026. I've successfully lobbied for the International Business Conference to create a new track for CMS, and it had enough papers to be a separate breakaway session at the IBC conference in Swakopmund last week. In 2021, I started a critical scholarship discussion group in the Department of Business Management to create more awareness of CMS and develop capacity. This discussion group regularly invites international speakers on diverse topics, and our audience has also extended beyond UJ to the University of Pretoria, UKZN, UNISA, University of Stellenbosch, and just as of yesterday, University of Cape Town also. Upon reflection on almost 30 years as an academic, there are a couple of things that my path down CMS has taught me. And I think these things are invaluable. Not only to be a more nuanced academic, but also to be a more refined person in general. I present 4 aspects. Firstly, trust your instincts. Listen to that little voice inside you. The more you grow as an academic, the louder that voice becomes. Of course, this voice or gut feel is a function of both expertise and experience. But let the voice guide you when in doubt. You'll be surprised how accurately this voice can guide you. Where's Daniel? Thanks. That's one you taught me. Secondly, understand the tradition of your discipline. History is of great importance, as our current thinking is a function of history. Bob Marley was a great proponent of history. Recall the lyrics of Buffalo Soldier, where Marley laments, "If you know your history, then you would know where you're coming from. Then you wouldn't have to ask me, who the hell do you think I am?" All too often in management, we're obsessed with the current. We berate students for not using current sources, for example. Although there is some merit in this point of view as thinking changes, all too often our obsession with the current makes us forget where ideas come from in the first place. For example, we teach students, as we were taught, that there are 4 functions of management. But Henri Fayol originally wrote 5 functions in 1916. Now, in my worst French accent, those 5 were prévoyance, organisation, commandement, coordination, and contrôler. The first translation into English in 1930 was unable to find a single word for commandement, and instead clumped commandement and coordination together as leading, and incorrectly reduced it to 4 functions of management. Similarly, we are all taught that Maslow's theory of motivation is to be viewed as a pyramid. But, as Bridgman, Cummings, and Ballard point out in their fascinating 2018 article, Maslow never purported it as such. Only in the 1960s did it appear in management texts as a pyramid to gain appeal among scholars and students alike. Thirdly, read philosophy. Taking from my own experience, I felt as though my world expanded exponentially when I was exposed to philosophy. I was exposed to ways of thinking and ideas I did not think were possible. Philosophy is not only necessarily only that which is. It is also that which is possible and probable. In a sense, it's tantamount to intellectual science fiction. And just like actual sci-fi, yes, you can do without it, but you're much better off if you do know about it. But delve specifically into the philosophy of science, especially in management, where positivism is so pervasive and leaves little room for alternative epistemologies. We need meta-theoretical, dialectical engagements to engage in and to explore different epistemologies in order to promote varied knowledge creation traditions and practices. Lastly, cast the net wider than your own discipline. What lies beyond the management body of knowledge is often far more useful and far more interesting than the management body of literature itself. Thus, not only philosophy, but sociology, politics, history, cultural studies, anthropology, psychology, and even quantum physics. This not only enriches your worldview and how you see your own discipline, it also enriches your basic general knowledge too. I guess at the end of the day, somewhere along the line, I realized I was one of the proverbial prisoners in Plato's cave. And I'd stumbled upon an escaped prisoner who'd come back into the cave to tell us about the real world outside. I decided to follow him out. Stated in more 21st century sci-fi terms, I was confronted by my metaphorical Morpheus, who offered me a choice of 2 pills. I took the red one. In closing off, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize a few people who've left a lasting impression on me and who have shaped my thoughts and ideas. Some are role model academics, others just good friends with whom I can just have a good conversation. Some are here tonight, others are unfortunately not with us anymore. So in no particular order, and titles aside, thank you to Nina Overton de Klerk, Sunay Bronkhorst, Whitey van der Linde, Marty Clark, Ernst Neuland, Art Boesenkool, Marius Pretorius, Mimi Struwig, Chris Callahan, Sean Rugenan, Jacques Keen, Remigish Gavlik, Hein Prinsloo, Mornay Roberts Lombard, David Pue, and of course, a big thank you to the love of my life, Tia Tleps. Thank you also to my current and past heads of department who had to put up with me. And thank you also to my former dean, Daniel van Lille, for giving me room to forge my own path. Don't always quite know if you agreed to things just to shut me up or if you actually saw what I had in mind, but thanks anyway. And lastly, thanks to the family for just being there and being accepting at all times. Thank you.
esteemed Vice Chancellor Professor van Vuren, esteemed Executive Dean Professor Nsalaze, esteemed members of Senate, fellow academics, distinguished attendees and online guests. Have you ever wondered what makes a university professor? Because of course we know it's professional knowledge, right? This is something we don't need to discuss. But there's also a set of quantities which are quite hard to define but easy to recognize. And you see, it's no coincidence that from our times at the university, we remember mostly two types of professors. First, those who made us suffer. Difficult exams, you know, sometimes pain in the classroom, right? But also, we do remember our mentors, and those people always had great knowledge. They knew how to pass it to younger generations. They knew how to motivate us to dig deeper, to ask questions, and also go into research. But on the other hand, they knew how to make us laugh. They knew also how to be empathetic when we needed them to be. And I would like to ask myself together, and all of you, whether Professor Goldman, that I know and that you know, is actually a complete, not just a full professor. I was searching for a quote which would match Professor Goldman's ethos, and I found one from Alphaville, his favorite band, or as you probably could have noticed already, one of his favorite bands, because Geoff knows at least as much about music as he knows about management. And the quote is, "It's so hard to get old without a cause." And I truly believe this quote resonates in me, because I believe that Professor Goldman has a cause. And he pursues this cause it's an ongoing commitment to self-improvement. He pursues this cause every day, to be a little bit better every day, both as a researcher, both as a teacher, but also as a human being. And I've seen this with my own eyes throughout his whole career, but I have proof for this too, you know. The proof I'll give you later. Now let's maybe elaborate a little bit of what I understand under being a complete professor. There are some qualities of a person that I think make us complete human beings. One is wisdom. And, well, I don't think I need to elaborate more on that, especially that you've got papers that prove it, right? So wisdom is obvious. But there's another one already mentioned, thank you. It was integrity. And I've seen Geoff as somebody who's following his moral compass all along the way, both in private life and in academia. Just to give you a professional example, you know, we make a lot of reviews. Every time I'm asking Geoff for a review, I'm getting a honest, professional, scientific review, not a friendly review. I truly admire this fact. Number 3, well, most of you probably also know that Geoff speaks his mind. And you know, I would say it's not quite a common feature today. It requires courage, it requires the already mentioned integrity, and I found also a quote that maybe supports this statement. It's a quote from Koos Kamboes, another one of a favorite musician, your favorite musician, and the quote is, "So whatever this is all about, I'll say it straight, I'll sing it out." Well, that's the Geoff I know. But you know, I also realized when listening to your speech that Professor Goldman has got another quality that, in my opinion, contributes to be a complete professor. And this is being a rebel, not a very positive quality, I would say, not taking things for granted, not taking statements, especially when they're written in, you know, smart books and scientific journals, for being true just because they are there. He's questioning them. But not just to question, not to discuss for the sake of discussion, to go deeper, to dig deeper, to find out the real truth in it. Well, there's another element, there's another quality, empathy. Believe it or not, Geoff's got empathy. He's hiding it deeply. And maybe the one that is most important here, he's got distance to himself. A short story, long time ago, almost 12, 15 maybe years ago, when we weren't cooperating yet, but we knew already each other. He came to my city, and the only locum I could have offered him was a place that did not fulfill any standards, any academic standards, any human standards at all. When I think it, after all these years, well, you had all the rights not to ever respond my emails, ever call me again. Well, yet, here we are. So thank you for this too. So these 6 quantities I mentioned, they are, in my humble opinion, making Geoff a complete professor. But it's not only just my opinion. I also have proof for this, and international activities that I had the chance to observe of Professor Goldman prove it. First of all, he's a facilitator of international research teams and long-term cooperations, not, one paper and that's it. Second, he's a great, and I really mean it, he's a great ambassador of South Africa in Europe, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, and I know that you're a great ambassador of Europe here in Africa. It's been already said that Geoff has been cooperating with renowned international journals. I would just add that where we cooperate as members of advisory boards of journals in Entrepreneurial Business and Economics Review, a Web of Science Index journal, and Eastern European Journal of Regional Studies, his advice is heard, is being heard. He's not speaking often, but it's being heard. His critical management papers prove that Geoff is a critical thinker who brought critical management studies to Africa, but now, funny enough, he's influencing back in Europe research in this field. And most of all, I think that Geoff is a decent man, a wise person, a wise man, and a good friend. So in conclusion, I'd like to congratulate you, my dear Geoff, the prestigious title of full professor of the magnificent University of Johannesburg. And I extend my felicitations to the esteemed authorities of this institution for having Professor Dr. Geoff Goldman as a member of your faculty, of your university, both as a full professor and a complete professor. To encapsulate, there's one last quote I would like to share with you. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. This quote has been attributed to Confucius, but also to Benjamin Franklin. But after countless hours of discussions we've had, I could easily imagine this sentence coming from Professor Goldman. Thank you for your attention.
It's not an easy thing to put on these rods. You never know where your arms are supposed to go. Trust me, it is not easy. We can pull it up. There you go. Congratulations.
my daughter Christine come join us.
Please, come.
Come. She's so small she can stand in front.
This is a wide angle, right? There you go. Okay, Geoff, I did not know you before this evening. I knew you by name, but not by face. But I feel like I really know you, and this was absolutely wonderful. I loved, the story of your life. And the one thing is that I note that you've got a lot of hobbies, from cycads to motorcycles. We have one in common, and it's not cycads. Sort of, every morning on the way to work, I always think, should I leave the 4 wheels for 2 wheels? I'm not that brave yet. I don't know if you do 4 or 2 wheels to work. The one thing, that people often think about is, do wide interests, make good academics? And I think intuitively, and if you shoot from the hip, then the answer is no. Academics, we quite often think of academics as very narrow, very specialized people that, live for their work and they know nothing out of it. Geoff, and I think if this was our view, then we were very badly mistaken, because you have proved that the broader your interests, the better academic you are. We've now said a few times this evening, what is a professor and what makes a good professor. And I think, again, intuitively, the first thing that we would say is that it's a good researcher. We become professors because we do excellent research. We need to be an expert in a specific subject field. And the more specialized you are, the better you are. And that is true. But a good professor should also be an excellent teacher. And I think that is absolutely critical. We need someone that can inspire the youth, the people that we have in our classes. We need someone that can, capture the imagination, that can tell a story, using funny quotes and using, quotes from music, and I recognized a lot of the songs. And again, I feel that you are that complete professor, that are not only an excellent researcher, but that would also walk into the class where students, if it becomes the end of the period, students would almost be saying, oh, this is, can we stay for a double period? I think the other thing when I listen to what you were saying is that you are very inquisitive and you are very questioning, and it sounds like you said why a lot. And when you hear that, I'm always thinking of those 2-3-year-olds, they say, you say a sentence and they say why. And then, it doesn't matter what you say, the next word is why. And it doesn't matter what you say, the next word is why. And even though they test people, I feel like, you have said when it doesn't matter what people said, you said why. And even though they test people, I think the number of people that sit in the audience here this evening that are still here to support you, in spite of all your whys, is a very good testament to the person that you are. And for that, I think I salute you. If I had to do that many whys in my life, I can promise you there would be no one here this evening. It's clear that you also found the love of the second love, the third love, after your family, let's put your family together as one love, the second love of your life, and that is CMS. And whether you found it or it found you, I think that was a great fortune the day that article landed in your inbox. So, a great shout out to the person that sent that email. So I think I want to end off by saying go forth and capture the world. The world of CSM, the student world, the world that we have out here, and just continue to ensure that UJ deliver graduates that are inquisitive, that are critical thinkers, and that are ready to fill a niche that are open in the market. And I think that is you also. So, deliver graduates that are like you. And I think for that, the world will be a better place, and UJ certainly will climb higher than what it is. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very aware that I stand between you and I hope a glass of champagne to celebrate this evening. I always need to brag a little bit about our STH, our School of Tourism and Hospitality. That's also within the College of Business and Economics. I almost said education. You see, you've so inspired me now. The CBE, who actually are the people that run our restaurant, our Maribeng restaurant. It's quite a lot of students also. So, I'm always very appreciative of them. And then lastly, just to thank the people in the room for making the time to celebrate this event with us this evening, and of course, for those people that have joined online also. Thank you very much.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.